A billionaire father heard a scream from his son's room, a scream that did not sound normal, a scream that carried fear he had never heard from his little boy before. His legs became weak as he ran up the stairs, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold the door when he pushed it open. What he saw froze his breath. His son was on the floor crying, his small hands pulling the arm of the maid who had cared for him like he was her own child. She was lying there, not moving, her face pale, her fingers turning cold, her body too still for anyone who was alive. His son kept calling her name, begging her to wake up, begging her not to leave him, and the sound tore the father's heart in a way he could not explain. As the billionaire stepped into that room, fear wrapped around his chest. One question grew inside him, sharp like a knife, a question that made his stomach twist. Was she trying to save his son, or did something terrible happen before he reached that door? The toys scattered on the floor, the wet cloth, the look of panic on his boy's face. Everything in that room felt wrong, like a story had been told there that he arrived too late to understand. And as he stood there shaking, staring at the woman who had never failed his son, he felt something dark creeping into his thoughts, something that warned him that the truth inside that room was not simple, not safe, and not what he wanted to believe. What he did not know was that this moment would break every wall he thought he had, expose every lie he trusted, and force him to face a truth that would change every life under his roof forever. The scream echoed through the large, quiet house, a sound so sharp that it felt like it cut through the walls. Alexander Wilson was in his study with papers on his desk, trying to finish a call. When he heard it, it was not a simple cry. It was not a normal sound a child makes. It was a scream filled with fear. His heart felt heavy as he dropped the phone, pushed back his chair, and rushed toward the stairs. His feet hit the steps fast, and his legs felt weak as he climbed. He knew his son's voice very well, and this time, it did not sound like a child calling for help. It sounded like a child begging for life. When he reached the door of David's room, his hands were shaking so much that he almost missed the handle. He pushed the door open, and the sight waiting for him made the world inside him break. His 3-year-old son was sitting on the floor, crying so hard that he could barely breathe, pulling the arm of the maid who had cared for him like she was family. Sophia Martinez lay still beside him, her body quiet, her face pale, her hand cold in David's small fingers. Her eyes were closed, and her lips had lost all their color. She did not move at all. David kept calling her name. He said it again and again, his voice shaking, his tears running down his cheeks. He tried to shake her arm, tried to wake her up, tried to pull her closer. He did not understand why the woman who always held him tight was not answering him. Alexander felt frozen for a moment. Then he rushed inside, dropped to his knees, and grabbed his son first. He pulled David close, touched his face, checked his chest, checked his breathing. The little boy had tears everywhere, and there were red marks on his throat. Alexander's eyes moved fast between his son and Sophia. The floor was a mess. A small toy wheel was lying near the bed. A damp cloth was on the carpet. A thermometer blinked weak light. The room felt wrong, like a story had happened there that he arrived too late to understand. Fear entered him in a way he had never felt before. He looked at Sophia again, lying flat on the floor, her hands stretched out toward David like she had been reaching for him even as she fell. Her chest barely moved. He called for help with shaking hands. His voice cracked as he spoke to the emergency line. He said the words, but his mind felt far away, trying to hold on to his son while trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His eyes kept going back to Sophia's body. A maid who had never failed his boy, who had always been kind, gentle, patient. She was the only one David trusted completely. And now she was lying on the floor in his son's room, not breathing well, not moving, not answering. A fear grew inside him, a question that felt sharp like a knife. Was she trying to save his son, Or did something terrible happen before he reached that door? He did not want to think that way. But the red marks on David's neck, the toy wheel, and Sophia's still body pushed that question into his mind. His hands were shaking as he held David, and the little boy pressed his face into his father's chest, still crying for Sophia, still calling her name softly as if she might hear him. Footsteps rushed down the hallway, quick and loud. Margaret Harris, the head housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. She put her hand on her chest and gasped. Her eyes moved from Sophia to David, then to Alexander. She asked what happened, but her voice sounded unsure, like she was choosing her words slowly. Alexander tried to speak, but his voice felt weak. He said he heard the scream and found them like this. Margaret walked closer and looked down at Sophia with a face that seemed too calm for what she was seeing. The paramedics arrived minutes later. One team checked Sophia, another checked David. One of the medics looked at David's neck and asked Alexander if his son had been choking. That question made the room spin. Alexander did not know what to say. David cried harder and held tightly to his father. Sophia was lifted carefully onto a stretcher, her head leaning to the side, her arm falling free until a medic placed it back. David reached out for her, crying her name, and Alexander felt something painful rise in his chest. He watched the medics carry her out of the room, and for a moment he felt helpless. The woman who had cared for his child every day, the woman who had held him, fed him, soothed him, taught him how to say new words, was being taken away without opening her eyes once. As they moved her down the hallway, another medic spoke quietly, saying there was a small mark on her wrist that looked like an injection site. The words hit Alexander hard. He did not know what it meant, but it pushed that knife of doubt deeper. He wanted to believe Sophia would never harm his son. He wanted to believe she would protect him with her life. But the scene in front of him felt confusing, painful, and twisted. When the house became quiet again, Alexander stood in the center of the nursery, holding David close. The small boy's tears soaked his shirt. The toy wheel lay on the floor like a silent secret. The air felt heavy, and the room felt cold. Sophia was gone. David was scared, and Alexander was left with a growing fear that something inside his home was not what he thought it was. He did not know it yet, but this moment was the beginning of a truth that would break open everything he believed, everything he trusted, and everything he thought he understood about the people in his house. The ambulance doors closed with a heavy sound that stayed in Alexander's ears long after they pulled away. He sat in the back of the second ambulance holding David, trying to calm him, but the little boy would not stop shaking. David buried his face in his father's chest, gripping his shirt like he was afraid to let go. Alexander held him close, trying to breathe, trying to keep himself steady, but inside, everything felt twisted with fear and confusion. The ride to the hospital felt slow, even though the sirens were loud. David cried softly, calling Sophia's name again and again, and each time he said it, Alexander felt something painful inside him. He did not know how to make his son feel safe. He did not even know how to feel safe himself. He kept seeing Sophia on the floor, her hand reaching toward his son, her body still, her face pale. Every time he blinked, he saw it again. When they reached the emergency room, nurses rushed them inside. One nurse took David from his arms gently and checked his breathing, his throat, his temperature. She asked questions, but Alexander could barely answer. Has he been sick? Did he eat something strange? Has he been coughing earlier? Alexander kept saying the same words. I do not know. He hated the sound of it. He hated that he did not know anything that mattered at that moment. Another nurse placed a warm blanket around David, and the little boy held it tight, still crying. Alexander tried to rub his back, but David did not respond. He kept staring at the room, as if the world around him had become too big and too scary. In another part of the emergency room, doctors worked on Sophia. Alexander could not see her, but he could hear the voices of the medical team calling out numbers, asking for machines, asking for help. Every sound made his stomach twist. He wanted to go to her. He wanted to see her, but they would not let him near. They told him to wait, and waiting felt like punishment. A young doctor came toward him after some minutes. His face was gentle, and his voice was calm. He said David was breathing well, and that whoever performed the Heimlich had done it correctly. Those words hit Alexander hard. Sophia had saved him. Not harmed him, not failed him, but saved him. The truth of it made his chest tight. The doctor said they needed to monitor David for a while to make sure his throat did not swell. Alexander nodded. He looked at his son, who was staring at the blanket with empty eyes. He knew David was hurting. He knew fear had changed the child in one moment. Another hour passed, then another. Margaret arrived with a small bag of David's things. She placed a stuffed toy and a blanket beside him. Touching his head carefully, she asked how he was doing, and sighed heavily when she looked at him. She sat next to Alexander and spoke softly, saying she had been worried about Sophia for some time, saying she often looked tired and not herself, saying maybe she had been hiding something important. Her words came slowly, like she wanted them to sink in. Alexander did not answer. His mind was full of noise. He felt confused, scared, angry, and lost at the same time. He stared at the doors where the doctors had taken Sophia. He did not know what he wanted to believe anymore. Finally, a doctor stepped out, an older woman with gray hair and calm eyes. She asked if he was Mr. Wilson. Alexander stood up quickly, holding David close. The doctor explained that Sophia had a heart condition that was not being treated. Under heavy stress, the heart can suddenly lose control. She said they had managed to stabilize her for now, but she was still unconscious. Her voice was gentle, but the words felt heavy. Alexander felt something drop inside him. Sophia had been sick. Sophia had been hiding it. Sophia had been pushing herself through pain. He wanted to ask why she did not tell him, why she did not rest, why she kept working when she was this sick. He did not understand. He felt betrayed, sad, and confused all at once. The doctor continued speaking. She said Sophia had likely been feeling the symptoms for months, maybe longer. She said the stress of saving David had pushed her heart too far. She asked if Sophia had ever mentioned pain, shortness of breath, or weakness. Alexander shook his head slowly. She never told him anything like that. She never complained. She never asked for a day off unless it was for David's sake. When the doctor walked away, the silence felt heavy. David was asleep on his father's shoulder, holding the stuffed toy tightly. Alexander placed a hand on the back of his son's head and closed his eyes. He felt like he had failed both of them. Margaret placed her hand on his arm and said softly, "You have to think about David first." She said if Sophia had known she was sick and did not say anything, then David had been in danger without Alexander knowing. She said maybe it was time to think about replacing her when she recovered. Her voice sounded caring, but something inside Alexander felt strange when he listened. When they finally returned home, the house felt too quiet. David refused to sleep alone. He kept asking where Sophia was, his voice soft and scared. Alexander carried him to his room, held him until he slept, then stayed there for a long time. The image of Sophia on the floor would not leave his mind. Later that night, while the rest of the house slept, Alexander stood alone in the nursery doorway. The toy wheel was still on the floor. The blinking thermometer was still beside the bed. The same air, the same silence, the same pain. He walked slowly inside and picked up the toy wheel, holding it in his palm as if it carried the answer to everything. He looked around the room, feeling lost, feeling broken. His son was safe, but something inside him felt like it had cracked open. He whispered softly to himself, repeating a question he could not escape. What really happened in this room? And why does the truth feel so far away? The next morning came slowly, and the house felt like it was carrying a heavy cloud. Alexander barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sophia collapsing, and he saw David crying beside her. He woke up before the sun rose, sat on the edge of his bed, and stared at the wall. His mind felt thick with thoughts he could not escape. He knew he needed answers, but his heart felt scared of what the truth might be. David woke up early too. The child walked into his father's room quietly, holding his blanket, his eyes still swollen from crying. He climbed onto the bed without saying a word and pressed his head against Alexander's arm. Alexander wrapped an arm around him and held him close. The silence between them was sad and heavy. David had always been talkative in the mornings, always asking for cereal or cartoons. But today he said nothing. After some minutes, David whispered, "Where is Sophia?" His small voice sounded weak, like he already feared the answer. Alexander swallowed hard. He told him gently that she was still in the hospital, and the doctors were helping her. David gripped his father's arm tighter and whispered again, "I want her." The way he said it broke something in Alexander. He knew David was hurting deeply, and he knew he had to do something. After dressing David and giving him breakfast, he called the hospital. They said Sophia was still unconscious but stable. They said she might wake up later in the day. The news gave him a small amount of hope, but the fear stayed. Hours passed slowly. David stayed close to him all morning, refusing to play, refusing to walk far from his side. Alexander spent most of the time watching him, thinking about every moment Sophia had spent caring for him. She had loved the boy like he was her own. She had taught him songs, fed him when he refused food, rocked him to sleep when he cried at night, read him stories with a soft, warm voice. The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. Why would a woman like that hide something so serious? Why would she risk her life like this? Why did she go through all that pain alone? In the afternoon, he finally returned to the hospital with David. When they reached the hallway where Sophia was kept, a nurse walked toward them. She told him that Sophia was still not awake, but her heart was steady. She suggested that he wait in the family room, but David held his father's hand tightly and shook his head. Alexander picked him up. They walked together to the door of Sophia's room. They could not go inside yet, but they could see through the small window. Sophia lay there, connected to wires, her face still, her body weak. Her chest moved slowly. David pressed his small hand against the window and whispered her name softly. Tears filled his eyes again. He laid his forehead against the glass, staring at her with so much sadness that it made Alexander's throat tighten. A soft voice came from behind them. It was the older doctor from the night before. She explained more about Sophia's condition. She said Sophia had likely felt the heart problem for a long time. She said the pain she felt when she collapsed must have been strong. She said that if she had waited even a few more minutes before collapsing, things could have been worse. She also said that Sophia must have known something was wrong for months, because the symptoms were not new. She asked if Sophia ever mentioned short breaths, fatigue, or chest pain. Alexander shook his head again, feeling helpless. He asked the doctor quietly, "Why would she hide something like this?" The doctor looked at him with sad eyes and said, "Sometimes people hide pain when they feel like they have no other choice. Sometimes they are scared of losing the only thing they have." The words stayed in his mind long after she walked away. David fell asleep on Alexander's shoulder while they waited. His small hands held onto his shirt tightly. Alexander kept stroking his son's back, trying to calm him, but his own thoughts were spinning. He began to wonder about everything Sophia did in the last months. He remembered days she looked tired but smiled anyway, days she coughed softly but kept carrying David, days she forced a smile when she looked pale. He had never asked her anything. He had been too busy. He had not noticed anything until she fell on the floor. After some hours, they went back home. Margaret met them in the living room with a worried expression. She asked how Sophia was, and when he told her Sophia was still unconscious, Margaret sighed and shook her head. She said softly that Sophia should have told him she was sick. She said it was dangerous to hide something like that while caring for a child. Her voice sounded gentle, but something about her words felt strange to Alexander. He could not explain it, but something inside him felt unsettled. That night, David refused to sleep alone again. Alexander sat on the bed with him, holding him until he closed his eyes. When David finally slept, Alexander walked quietly to the nursery. The room felt different now. The toys on the floor, the small bed, the blanket on the chair, everything felt like it had a memory attached to it. Memories of Sophia laughing, Sophia singing, Sophia picking David up gently when he cried. The room felt empty without her. Alexander crouched down and picked up the toy wheel. He held it in his hand, staring at it. He knew this toy had been in David's mouth. He knew this toy almost killed him. He turned it over in his hand, trying to understand how something so small could cause so much fear. He stood up and walked to the window. The night outside was quiet. The house felt too big and too empty. He whispered to himself, trying to understand what he was feeling. The more he thought about everything, the more he felt lost. He wanted to know why Sophia hid her sickness. He wanted to know what really happened in that room. He wanted to know why he felt so guilty, even though he had not done anything wrong. He stayed there for a long time, staring at the dark sky. Then he turned back to the room, looked at the toy wheel again, and whispered softly, "Something is not right. I can feel it." He did not know yet that the truth hiding inside his home was darker and deeper than anything he had imagined. The next morning came with a strange quiet that did not feel normal. Alexander woke up with a tight feeling in his chest. The night had offered no peace. His mind kept circling around the same thoughts, the same questions, the same fear. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long moment before standing up. When he entered David's room, the boy was sitting upright on the bed, staring at the window. His blanket was wrapped around his shoulders, and his little face looked tired. Alexander sat beside him and touched his back gently. David leaned against him without speaking. The boy's silence was not the kind that comes from sleepiness. It was the kind that comes from pain. Alexander picked him up quietly, carried him to the kitchen, and warmed a small bowl of oatmeal. David barely touched it. He pushed the spoon away and whispered, "I want Sophia." Alexander felt that same sharp pain again. He wished he could tell his son everything would be fine, but he did not know if that was true. After breakfast, he carried David to the car. They were going back to the hospital. David leaned on him the whole way, holding on to his shirt. When they reached the hospital, the nurse greeted them softly. She led them to Sophia's hallway. The doctor from the previous day stepped out of a room and walked toward them. Her face looked calm, but her eyes held concern. She explained that Sophia was still unconscious, but her heart rhythm was steady. She said Sophia might wake up soon, or might need more time. She encouraged them to stay hopeful. Alexander nodded, but hope felt far away. He carried David to the small window again. The boy pressed his hand against the glass, staring at Sophia. His little fingers trembled. He whispered her name. His voice cracked. Alexander rested his hand on the back of David's head and swallowed hard. Minutes turned into hours. They stayed on the bench in the hallway. David sat on his father's lap, holding the stuffed toy Margaret had brought. Alexander kept his arm around him, trying to give comfort, but his own thoughts were pulling him deeper into confusion. He did not understand why Sophia hid her sickness. He did not understand why she kept working when her heart was failing. He did not understand why she carried that pain alone. The doctor approached again after some time. She asked if she could speak to Alexander privately. He nodded and stood up, giving David a small piece of candy to keep him calm. He followed the doctor to a quiet corner of the hallway. She explained that Sophia's condition was serious but treatable. She said Sophia could live a normal life with the right care. She then asked a question that made Alexander pause. She asked if Sophia had ever tried to schedule medical appointments through the household system. Alexander frowned. He told her he never saw any requests from Sophia. The doctor looked confused, saying Sophia must have known she needed help. She said the only reason someone would avoid treatment was fear or lack of support. Her words stayed in his mind even after she walked away. When they returned home that evening, Margaret was waiting near the door. She asked how Sophia was, and when Alexander told her there was no change, she sighed deeply. She placed her hand on his arm and told him softly that some people hide sickness because they are ashamed of being weak. She told him she always feared Sophia was not strong enough for the job. Her voice sounded caring, but her eyes did not match the softness of her words. That night, after David fell asleep, Alexander walked through the quiet house. The hallways felt colder than usual. He went into his study and turned on the light. He sat at his desk, staring at nothing. After a long moment, he reached for his laptop. He knew the security system recorded every room of the mansion. He had checked the nursery footage once before, in the rush of the hospital, but only briefly. Now he needed to understand. He needed to see everything again. He entered the system and typed in the date. The nursery camera loaded on the screen. The footage began to play. Sophia sat on the floor with David, helping him build blocks. She laughed softly when he knocked the tower down. Her smile was gentle and warm. She looked tired, but she kept playing with him with full attention. Alexander watched quietly, his chest tightening. Then the moment came. David picked up the toy wheel. He placed it in his mouth. Sophia noticed instantly. Her face changed with fear. She moved fast, pulling him up. She performed the back blows, then the Heimlich. The toy wheel flew across the room. David began to cry. Sophia held him tight, checking his breathing. She pressed her cheek to his head and whispered something. Then she placed him gently on the carpet. Her hand moved to her chest. She took a shaky breath. Then her body fell. She fell in a way that made Alexander grip the edge of his desk. She collapsed completely, but even as she fell, she pushed her arm backward to make sure David stayed safe. The detail broke him. He watched the scene again. The same fall. The same reach. The same love she had for his son. When the footage reached the moment she lay still on the floor, Alexander prepared to watch himself rush into the room. But something else happened. The door opened 3 minutes after Sophia collapsed. It was Margaret. She stepped inside quietly. She looked at Sophia, then at David, who was crying and bending over her. Then she stepped back, walked out, and closed the door. She did not return for 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Alexander froze. Something cold passed through his body. The chair beneath him suddenly felt too hard. He replayed it again, needing to be sure. Each time he watched, the truth felt heavier. Margaret had seen them. She had seen David in danger. She had seen Sophia unconscious, and she walked away. He leaned back slowly, feeling like the room was spinning. A new thought entered his mind. Something darker than any fear he carried before. Something that made his stomach twist. He whispered to himself, barely breathing, "Something is wrong with her." He did not know yet that this moment would open a door to lies he had trusted for years, and to a truth that would shake him to his core. The truth sat on Alexander's chest like a heavy stone. He could not move. He could not think clearly. He could only sit there staring at the paused footage of Margaret walking out of the nursery while Sophia lay helpless on the floor. Every second he replayed, it felt worse, colder, darker. He had trusted this woman for years, and she had walked away from his son's tears and the maid who had saved him. He stood up slowly, feeling something strong growing inside him. Anger, guilt, shame, fear, all mixing into one painful storm. He needed more answers. He needed to know the whole truth. He called his lawyer, his voice low and shaky, and asked for a private investigator. Not tomorrow, not later, but now. Within hours, a man named Mark arrived at the mansion, calm and sharp, carrying a small bag of tools and documents. Alexander took him to the study, closed the door, and showed him the footage. Mark watched it with narrowed eyes. When it ended, he took a deep breath and said softly, "This is not normal. This is not a mistake." He asked for permission to check the household computer system, the staff records, and the purchase logs. Alexander gave him everything he needed. He did not care what it cost. He needed the truth. For 2 days, Mark searched. During those 2 days, Alexander lived in broken pieces. He visited Sophia in the hospital with David every morning and every night. The doctors said she was still unconscious, but she was stable. David would sit beside her bed, holding her hand gently, talking to her even though she could not answer. He told her he missed her. He told her he wanted her to come back home. He told her he did not like the new nanny. He told her he loved her. Every word made Alexander's chest hurt. He knew his son needed her. He knew she was more than a maid to him. She was the person who gave him comfort, who held him when he cried, who stayed up with him when he had nightmares. She was the heart inside their home, and without her, everything felt wrong. On the third evening, Mark returned to the mansion with a folder. Alexander sat in his study while David slept in the next room. Mark opened the folder slowly and looked at Alexander with serious eyes. He explained that Margaret had deleted every medical appointment Sophia tried to schedule for months. Every time Sophia requested approval to see a doctor, Margaret removed it before Alexander could see it. The system logs showed Margaret's username on every deletion. She had also written false notes on Sophia's performance reviews, claiming she was late, tired, irresponsible, when she was actually early every day. Then Mark showed him a paper with a purchase receipt. Margaret had ordered a set of toys that had been recalled for choking danger, including the small wheel that almost killed David. She had placed it in the nursery 2 days before the incident. Alexander felt sick. Mark continued. He found that Margaret had been trying to push out Sophia for almost a year. She wanted her niece Emily to take the job. She had done the same thing in 2 previous households before being hired by Alexander's father decades ago, manipulating other workers until they were fired. Those families had refused to give official references because they wanted to forget her. Alexander sat down hard. He felt his whole world shaking. He thought about the morning he fired Sophia without letting her speak, the moment he grabbed her arm, the way she looked at him with hurt in her eyes. He thought about David crying for her. He thought about the doctor saying Sophia must have been afraid to lose the job she needed. For the first time, he understood. She had been fighting for her life, and for her brother's life, alone, scared, and still giving everything she had to his child. And he had treated her like she was nothing. He stood up quickly and said he needed to see her. He needed to fix this before it was too late. He took David and rushed to the hospital. When they reached Sophia's room, the doctor stopped them gently. She said Sophia had finally regained consciousness. She was awake, but weak, confused, scared. She needed calm, not stress. Alexander took a deep breath and nodded. He entered the room slowly with David in his arms. Sophia lay on the bed with her eyes half open. Her face looked tired, but she was breathing on her own. She turned her head slowly when she heard the door. When she saw Alexander, she looked away, her eyes filling with tears. But when she saw David, her breath caught. The little boy reached out to her, calling her name in a broken whisper. Sophia lifted her trembling hand and touched his cheek. Tears slid down her face. David climbed carefully onto the bed, laying his head on her shoulder. She held him gently, the way she always did. Her voice was soft and weak when she spoke. "Baby, I missed you so much." Alexander stepped closer, his voice shaking as he said her name. She did not look at him. Her hand stayed on David, but her eyes stayed down. He told her everything. He told her about Margaret. He told her about the deleted appointments. He told her about the toy. He told her about the lies. He told her he was sorry. Not quick sorry, but real sorry. The kind that hurts when you speak it. He told her he should have listened. He told her he should have trusted her. He told her he failed her in the worst way. Sophia cried silently. She whispered that she had only wanted to keep her job to take care of her brother. She whispered she never meant to hide anything. She whispered she was just scared. She whispered she would never hurt David. Alexander felt his chest break open. He promised her she would never carry pain alone again. He told her he would make sure her brother got the treatment he needed, no matter the price. He told her she was not alone anymore. When he became quiet, Sophia finally looked at him. For a moment, they stared at each other with the pain of everything they had walked through. She did not forgive him instantly, but she saw the truth in his eyes. She nodded slowly. Not fully healed, not fully trusting, but willing to start again. Months later, everything changed. Sophia recovered fully after surgery. Her brother entered a new treatment program, and his health improved. David returned to laughing, running, and smiling. Alexander fired Margaret and rebuilt his home with honesty. Sophia moved into the small garden house on the estate, not as a maid, but as family. David visited her every morning. Alexander visited every evening. Their world grew quiet, safe, warm. One night, as they watched David chase fireflies in the yard, Sophia looked at Alexander and whispered, "I thought my life was over." Alexander looked at her gently and said, "Your life was just beginning, and so was mine." The three of them stood together, a broken family rebuilt through pain, truth, and love that refused to quit. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones carrying the deepest pain, yet they still give love with a full heart. Sophia saved a child while her own life was falling apart, and she almost lost everything because no one cared enough to ask how she was doing. But even in her darkest moment, love found a way to lift her again. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs a message of hope today. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and what you learned from this story. And if you want more emotional stories like this, comment, "More stories," and you will be the first to get our next release. Before you go, answer these 3 questions in the comment section. 1. Do you believe Sophia deserved a second chance from the start? 2. What would you have done if you were the billionaire in this situation? 3. Do you think love can heal broken families like this one? Thank you for watching, and stay blessed.